Good day, everyone out there. Hopefully the audio in this webinar is coming through well. We will be getting started in just a couple of moments. As there's a few last minute people connecting. So logistically, if you have any questions as we go through this webinar, there'll be time for questions at the end, but also feel free, if you have questions at any point in the webinar, to type your questions into the chat window of our GoToMeeting client, and I will try and keep an eye on that and answer any questions as we go along. Chances are, if you have a question about something that we're covering today, someone else in our audience does as well, so you can be the brave individual who speaks up, so to speak, and asks the question. That said, we will be getting started here in just another minute. Just giving another minute for a few last minute connections. Also, just as an FYI, we're based, Researchware is based out of New England in the United States. And we've had some miserable weather up here with snowstorms and rain at the beginning of the week. And I've been outside a lot and my voice is starting to get very gravelly. So if I have to clear my throat or take a drink of water during this webinar, I apologize for the brief delays. But hopefully I'll make it through the webinar without losing my voice today. Okay, that said, let's get started. This is an introduction to HyperRESEARCH, our tool for qualitative research. And let's get going. The first thing that I want to talk about is the structure of HyperRESEARCH, because I believe if you get a general idea of how HyperRESEARCH manages your research data, it will help you keep things organized and easy to find whenever you need them. So HyperRESEARCH is an application, just like any other application on your computer for Mac OS or Windows. It's like Microsoft Word or Excel or any tool that you might use on your computer. In HyperRESEARCH, you create study files. A study file is a document. You can create multiple study files like Word documents. You can take your study file that contains your qualitative research work, and you can do save as from the file menu and save a copy of it. And you can, if you want to do an iteration and have backups or whatever, you can make as many copies of the file as you want. Excuse me, sorry, losing my voice there again already. So in HyperRESEARCH, you have a study file. In that study file, you have your codebook. Your codebook is your master list of codes. In HyperRESEARCH, we're methodology agnostic, meaning we don't embed any particular type of qualitative research methodology in our product. You can use any methodology you want pretty much with our tool. Because to us, a list of master codes are just labels, letters, words, phrases, numbers, etc., are just labels that have meaning to you as the researcher that you're going to apply to chunks of content, passages of text or sections of audio or video or portions of image or paragraphs from a PDF file or whatever your research material is that you're qualitatively analyzing. So your codebook contains your list of master codes. A study file contains one or more cases, and cases are represented here as folders because they're buckets to contain your coding. they contain what we call code references, or just references. And a code reference is when you take a code from your master codebook and you apply it to a chunk of source material, a paragraph of text, a section of an image, a chunk of audio, whatever the case may be. It then records the application of that code on the current case. So in the example shown here for references, you have the name of the code, something unimaginative like code 01, was applied to a document called interview 01. And then this other information is just some things that HyperRESEARCH uses to essentially have this serve as a bookmark or a hyperlink to your content. In this particular case, it's code 02 was applied to interview 01, and it's applied from character 211 to character 298, but you don't really need to know that. But it is important to understand that these are like bookmarks or hyperlinks, because you then have your source documents. These are your interviews or transcripts of interviews or focus group transcripts or PDF texts that you've acquired that has whatever the content is from surveys, from interviews with people, whatever the content is that is part of your qualitative research study. These are documents on your computer: Word documents, RTF documents, open office documents, PDF files, image files, video clips, audio clips. These are other documents on your file. And when you open one of those documents in HyperRESEARCH and apply a code from your master codebook to a section of that document, it records a code reference or a reference on the current case. It doesn't actually copy that paragraph or whatever you coded into the study file. It just keeps a bookmark or a link back to that. So in your study, when you're working in HyperRESEARCH, if you want to retrieve the content, the text that a particular code points to or is a bookmark to, you need to have access, HyperRESEARCH needs to have access to those source files. So we recommend, just for organizational purposes, that you on your computer create a folder inside your documents folder. For example, you create a folder that's called My Research or whatever you want. And in that folder is where you put all your source documents that you're going to be coding. And that's where you save your study file too, or however many study files you end up having from HyperRESEARCH, so that all your research is in one, for your research project, your research study is in one convenient folder. The value for doing that is HyperRESEARCH can find the source documents whenever it needs them much more easily. It doesn't have to look all over your computer for them. And secondarily, by having your study file and your source files all in one folder, it makes making backups, which is something you should do, because heaven forbid something happens to your computer. You put a lot of hours into qualitative research and you don't want to lose your work. So if something happens to your computer, like you drop your laptop down a flight of stairs or whatever, you can take that one folder, hopefully on a regular basis, and back it up somewhere. If you're at a university and you have access to a university file server, you can back it up to the file server. If you're using an internet service like Dropbox or something like that, you can have it saved up on Dropbox or iCloud or OneDrive if you're a Microsoft person, or you can simply copy that one folder which contains your study files and all your source files onto a little USB memory stick as a backup on a regular basis. But if you need to, for example, provide your research, say you're a doctoral student, you need to provide your research to your dissertation committee, or you're a faculty member and you're working as part of a research team and you want to provide your research to a colleague for review or something like that. Your research consists of your study file that has the code book and all the code references on the cases, as well as all those source documents for them to be able to access the underlying content. Excuse me. Back to cases for a moment. Cases are not only a bucket where your code references are recorded when you apply a code to a chunk of source material, but cases in HyperRESEARCH are also what we call your unit of analysis. They represent the collection of coding that you typically want to compare to one another as part of the questions or analysis that you're trying to ask about your research. And let me illustrate that by a couple of examples. So a lot of qualitative studies are a series of interviews with individuals. Asking about some topic or some question. A recent one we had was on the topic of addiction. And so it was a study where they'd interviewed a number of people on the topic of addiction to try to find out what are the psychological and sociological contributors to addictive behavior. So in that case, what you're interested in is having, say, each person be a case, so that you code your interviews with a single individual, all to one case, and then the next individual is coded to another case, and the next individual to another case, so that you can use the filtering and analysis tools in HyperRESEARCH to ask questions like, how many of the subjects in my research study that had addictive behavior also had these particular codes that relate to certain societal influence, like they may have lived in poverty or had an abusive childhood or this, that, or whatever the other codes may be. And that will let you filter and see, 7 out of my 15 cases had this behaviors, had these codes, so that you can compare one case to the next, essentially using our analysis tools. In a different kind of study, say a longitudinal or time-based study in political science, where you're looking at political campaign ads from the 2000 election to 2004 election to 2008 election, and 2012, and so on and so forth, and you're interested in how political advertisement has changed over time. Has it become more negative? Has it become more polarized, et cetera, et cetera? Each case may represent the ads from a particular time period. So you can see, okay, the cases, when I select cases that have these codes for polarization and these codes for negativity, I'm getting my cases that are more recent selected instead of the cases that are older, showing that I've got this trend where I'm seeing more codes related to negativity in more recent political advertisement and less in older political advertisement. So your cases might represent years in a longitudinal study. In a educational study, where, for example, I'm asking questions about how different audiences are responding to a new educational policy, and my audience is students, teachers, parents, and administrators of the school system, I may only have 4 cases, one representing each audience, and I code all my sources related to focus groups or individual interviews with students to the student case, and all those related to parents to the parents case, administrators to the administrators case, and teachers to the teachers case. And then I'm basically looking at how those 4 different audiences respond. So our cases in HyperRESEARCH are what you need them to be to essentially represent the unit of analysis based upon your type of research study and the methodology that you're using. But functionally, they're where your coding is recorded to. When you apply a code to a chunk of source material, it's recorded to the current case. So that's the structure and background of HyperRESEARCH. Enough PowerPoint. I'm going to exit out of PowerPoint and get right into the demonstration now. So bear with me while I switch around here. So this is HyperRESEARCH version 4.50. That's our latest version. If you have been using an older version of HyperRESEARCH, but you are just coming here to one of our webinars for the first time, Version 4.5 has as one of its new features full support for Unicode. So previously, your source documents could be in any international language you want. You could code Chinese, Arabic, Hebrew, Japanese, you name it. But the codes themselves and things like our annotations and certain other features within the tool basically had to be in Roman languages like Spanish, English, French, etc. But now we're fully Unicode. Anywhere that you can enter, you, the researcher, can enter information. It can be in any language you want. So that's one of the key new features of the version 4.5. It's also for Mac OS users, what's known as a 64-bit application, which means it will run on the new Mac OS Catalina or 10.15 operating system. So if you are a Mac OS user and you're looking to upgrade to Catalina, you will need, and you're running an older version of HyperRESEARCH, you will need to upgrade to HyperRESEARCH 4.5.0. For users of HyperRESEARCH 4.0. Anything 4.0.1.2.3.4, etc. For anyone who's in the HyperRESEARCH 4 series, 4.5 is a free upgrade. Same license key activates it. So back to the basics. When I open up HyperRESEARCH, I can click on new study from the welcome menu. That was this menu that you saw here. I just clicked on new study menu. I may have done that a little too fast for folks. So you get a study window here for an untitled study. It has a single untitled case currently in there, and you have your code book with no codes in it, is how you start in a study. But getting going is as easy as going to the source menu. You have a case menu for working with cases, source menu for working with sources, and a codes menu for working with codes. It's pretty straightforward. I go to the source menu. I want to open up a source file. I'm going to navigate to the right place here. Which is, oh, there we go, 4 or 5 webinars, sorry, which is my first interview. I'm going to open up this interview. It's just a text file. And I can start coding. I can come in here and I can see that this person is imagining what this particular study that I'm working on here is a sample study that comes with HyperRESEARCH. It's a tiny study that was just done to illustrate HyperRESEARCH. Students in a sociology class were asked to envision their life 20 years in the future. And the question is, does everyone, when they're 20 years old, envision their life when they're 20 years in the future, when they're 40, as turning out to be the perfect life, or do some people, have concerns about how their life may turn out? So in this particular case, the person thinks they're going to have a pretty good job. So I might start coding that over here. So I select it just like you would select text in Microsoft Word. I don't have any codes currently, so one of the first things I'm going to want to need to do is add a code. I could do that from this edit codes menu, where I could enter a new code, and I could say fabulous. I'll just say non-traditional job. Spell it right. And I've got my first code, and I've got selected text, and I hit apply code, and now I have applied that code to that text, and it's been recorded on my current untitled case. All right, so I've gone through here, and then I see another line in here about, they're making a 6-figure salary. So we'll create another new code, and we'll call that making a high salary. And then again, we can just apply code, and I've applied that code to that passage. And then I might go on here, and there's some section here about family life, and maybe I just want to apply that with a new code called family, and we'll apply code. And if I don't want to create my codes organically as I go along, like say I prepared a code list, I can import a list of codes right at the start into HyperRESEARCH if I want to. From a text file, Word file, from a bunch of different formats, you can import a code list. And then I have my list of codes in here, but you can see that coding is as easy as I select some text. That text can be a single character, and I can go here and make a new code called tiny code. Wow, I can't spell today. Tiny code, which is a single character, or I could come over here and I could select the entire text, and I can create a new code called large code. Okay. It doesn't matter what the size of the code is. Whatever you can select, you can have nested codes, as you're seeing here, layered on top of one another. So all of these are overlapped by the large code that covers everything. We have this codes in context feature here that actually shows you sort of the swath of your coding that you can see. You can turn that on or off as you like. And your codes are recorded over here on your current case. Again, all you need to do to code something is select it, whatever size it is. I can apply multiple codes at once. I could select, for example, oops, I didn't want to quite do that. I wanted to select this one and that one. I could apply both codes at the same time. I could apply the codes by dragging the codes and dropping them on the selected text, and it just applied those codes. So there's a variety of different ways that you can perform basic coding. Coding works the same no matter what material I'm working with. If I go in and I open an image, let's say I'm doing an architectural study, I go in, I select a chunk of this image, I can pick an existing code over here if it made sense, click apply code, and I've now applied that code to an image. If I go up here and I open, oops, I don't have a PDF file in here. Well, we'll go up here and we'll open a movie or audio file. I'm pretty sure I have one of those. Yep, there we go. So we'll open a video. Up comes the video, or audio, I should say. We'll click here and select a section of this audio, and then we'll go apply that as a new code called audio response. Click OK, apply the code, and now I've applied that audio. So again, if I click back on any of these, it opens the document for me. It's just a bookmark. It opens the document, highlights the section in the document. If I come back here for video, it opens that and it begins playing the audio. I don't know if the audio is coming through properly or not, but it's playing the audio segment that I recorded. If I click on the image, it brings back up the image for me right away. So whether you're coding PDFs, Word documents, image files, audio or video, the coding process is the same. I select some chunk of the source material, I click on one or more codes, I hit the apply codes, and I get the codes over here. When I want to move on to the next, I go to my source file, I open my next interview, and I start coding in here. This person is a successful television journalist, so they too have a pretty good non-traditional job. We'll apply that code, and they're, you know, an anchor woman for a Boston area network. Well, they're probably making a pretty high salary too. We'll apply that code as well, and then they talk about their family in here. So we'll go apply the family code and click apply. And then I can continue to move on. I could open my next source file and keep coding, or I could remember what that guy in the webinar was talking about, how my cases are units of analysis. They're what I want to compare to one another. And here I've coded a bunch of codes for my first interview and a number of codes for my second interview, all to the same case. What happens now? What if I wanted them on separate cases so I can see what my first subject is doing versus my second subject. Do I have to go recode this? And the answer is no. It's very easy to move codes around in HyperRESEARCH. I can simply select these codes that I coded to interview 2, cut them. Whoops. Of course, I have to pick the right thing here. Cut the code references off from there. Go to the cases menu, create a new case, and we'll call this subject 2, and paste. And now I've got my interview 2 cases on a separate case. I could come back to interview 1, and just so this isn't called untitled, I can rename this case subject 1. Now I have subject 1 is one of my cases, subject 2 is another case. Maybe I should have been more consistent in my labeling. And I can go back and forth where here's subject 2, here's subject 1, and my various codes between them. And I can navigate through these by clicking on them or using the arrow keys to move down, up, and down through the codes, the up and down arrow keys, and the left and right arrow keys move me between cases. So it's fairly easy to navigate around it. And as you can see, it's highlighting them as I go. So now I might want to move on and start with my third person in my research study. And now that I've decided I want each person to be a separate case, I can go and do a new case and do subject 3. And I've created my new case, and then I'll go open my subject 3 source, and I'll start looking back here. So here they are is biggest law firms in Boston. So we'll code that as a non-traditional job, and probably ought to code it as making a high salary at the same time. Then once again, they're talking about their family, so we'll apply code related to the family life. And again, I can continue on. If there are any questions at this point for anyone in the audience with regard to coding, it really is as simple as select content, add another code by choosing new code here, or you can choose new code from the codes menu, either one. This little pop-up menu is just a convenient shortcut for mostly everything in the codes menu. Enter code and apply it. You can apply it by clicking apply code, or you can apply it by selecting a code and hitting a carriage return, and that functions as the equivalent of apply code. Or you can use control and the little backwards apostrophe as another way of, if you're a keyboard oriented person, of applying a code. So there's a lot of different ways within HyperRESEARCH to do things, whether you prefer to point and click or use a keyboard. And then I could keep on until I've basically coded my study with my various interviews, which will look something like if I go open a different study file. And I'm not going to save this one. We're going to open the actual Cinderella study file that I have here. Looks something like this. So I have now 8 cases named case 01, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, very original naming conventions. If I start here at case 1 and I look at this should look familiar. This is where we coded their, president of the Copley Advertising Agency, and that they like having power in their career and making a high salary, and gets married and stays married, and a variety of codes that we have in here where we've coded different materials. If we go to the next one, we'll see, fabulous high career, fabulous job as an anchor person, also, making a high salary, and a variety of other codes. If we keep on going, we can see the coding as we go through here. If I click on these to illustrate it, we can see the different interviews. They've now all been coded. So I've got my 8 cases now. That's the length of the study that I've coded. I can navigate through them by clicking on this little pull down bar here and going between the cases. I can navigate them by using these little arrows to navigate between the cases. I can navigate between the cases by using go to and going to a particular case. I can navigate by going first, last, next from under the cases menu or using the control equivalents. So I have a variety of different ways of navigating around through my cases. And again, when I'm on a case, clicking on any code takes me immediately to that source file and shows me the code. So now that I've completed a degree of coding and we have some tools that we will talk about sort of in our sort of advanced HyperRESEARCH webinar that we have next week, like for example, our AutoCode tool where you can do wildcard searching for text and pattern match different text and automatically code the matched text and however much content around it. So there's some assistive tools for doing large scale coding that can help you. It's just one example. Before I jump to the next thing, which is now that I've got it coded, how do I begin to do my analysis? I just want to switch out of this study for a moment and show you one other tool that if you're a beginner just starting your research study that a lot of people find very helpful. And that is when I first start up HyperRESEARCH and I've got this, you know, new untitled study sitting there, it can be daunting. It's the qualitative researchers equivalent of writer's block. It's where do I start? I don't have a code list. I don't know what my codes will be. Where do I begin? And one of the things that we include under our tools that we found helpful for that is our word counter. And I'll show you that in a minute. But first, when I have a new study and I want to use the word counter, I want to tell HyperRESEARCH where all my sources are. So I'm going to go to something under the sources menu called the source list. And in the source list, I'm going to add a whole bunch of sources from a folder, and I'm going to click the Cinderella folder where I have all my sources. Again, another value to having all your source documents in the same folder. So I'm going to click to add it all, and it adds all my sources. Now, for the purposes of this, I actually don't need the image that was in there. We're going to remove that, and I'm going to remove the video that's in there. I don't really need to do this, but just to keep things simple. So I've got my eight interviews that I had that I've now sort of identified. HyperRESEARCH knows where they are. If I click on them, it knows here it's located in this folder path. It tells me some information about it, you know, when it was created, modified, how big it is, etc. If I've applied codes, it would tell me, you know, which cases this source is used on and which codes have been applied to this, which is a helpful view here in the source list. But the most important thing I needed to do was simply tell HyperRESEARCH where all my sources are. Now I want to go to that word counter tool, and word counter is just what it says. It's a concordance. It's a word counter. So it goes through all my identified text sources and it counts the words to show them to me. Okay, and it shows them in this cloud view to begin with, which is a nice view because I can start to see the bigger the text, the more frequently this word occurs among my sources. So when I'm facing that writer's block or researcher's block equivalent of the blank study, doing a word count lets you see right away, well, children, something related to children is probably a theme that will exist in my study. Family is one, career is one, right? Spouse is one, you know, whether my life turns out all right or not is one, job is another one. Just by looking at sort of where the big word counts are, I can start to get an idea of some of the major codes that I'm going to want to create in that blank code book to get myself going based upon the frequency of occurrence of words that are in my study. I can click over to list view and I can see a much better view here where I have a count of these. I might want to filter some common words like have and are and something like that out. And you can do that. You can, you know, click on some of these and remove them from the counts if you don't want to see them. But just skimming through this can give you some idea again of where the big areas are that you're going to want to code. So I wanted to show that tip for new people that are just starting their first research study. That said, we're not going to save this one. We're going to go back here to that already coded Cinderella study that I showed you. And I'm now going to show you a bit about how to approach analysis. So the key in HyperRESEARCH, oops, hang on one sec here. Oh, okay, never mind. Sorry, I thought there was a question, but that wasn't. So the key to analysis in HyperRESEARCH is a combination of a couple of our tools under the tools menu. And the two key tools are a frequency report tool, which basically shows you information about code frequencies in your study. How many times does this code occur and where? Code frequency is one of the key tools for analysis, and our report builder, which is what lets you extract the content that you've coded for review to see what the people are actually saying for particular codes, is the other main tool, perhaps the main tool among our tools under the tools menu. Both these tools, both the frequency report and the report builder, operate fundamentally on your current filters, your current case filters and your current code filters. And HyperRESEARCH has two types of filters. It has a filter for you to filter or slice or dice or sort through your cases based upon different information, and a filter to slice and dice or sort through the code references on those cases is another type of filter that you can apply. So you have case filters to take those folders in that first picture and reduce those folders down to a subset that meets some criteria to examine, and a code reference filter that takes these code references and can filter them down based upon some criteria that you're looking at. And let me now illustrate these as I sort of walk you through them. So under case filters, which I can get to from the little shortcut pop-up menu, filter cases here, or I can also do it from the case menu. I can come to filter cases and I have all the same options right here that I do from that little pop-up menu. But I can filter in a variety of ways. I can filter based on name cases. So I can go to a particular case and say, I just want to look at case 3 and 6 and 7 for whatever reasons. I want to filter just to these three cases, pick them by name, okay? And click OK. Maybe I want to go back in and review the interviews of, Jane, John, and Jim, three of my subjects, and see what they've said for whatever reasons. So I can filter specifically to cases by name. And as you'll see, it changes to my case filter says I'm only seeing 3 of 8 cases. If I click on the pop-up menu, instead of that whole list of 8, I only see the 3 that I've now filtered to, and I can navigate between them, right? If I use these navigation arrows, I'm navigating just between the 3 currently filtered cases. So I can narrow it down if I just want to look at those particular cases. If I want to get back to all my cases at any point in time, I can select show all cases, and now I'm back to 8 of 8. And again, as I navigate through here, I can now see all my various cases. I can show only cases that have a particular source coded to them. I can hide all but the current case. So I do that. Now the only case I'm seeing is case 1. If I want to make sure I'm not on the wrong case while I'm coding my content, I can focus so where I'm filtered just to a particular case. Again, I can always get back to what I want by show all cases. But the most powerful piece of the case filters is the show cases by criteria. And show cases by criteria lets you ask questions about your cases. When we were browsing through the source documents, the interviews, we had a number of people who were talking about when they envision their life 20 years in the future, having a super career, an anchor woman of a TV show, a primetime news show, a high-powered lawyer in Boston, all these, the head of their own advertising agency. These very successful careers. So we know that from our coding that a number of our subjects envision, when they envision their lives in the future, will have a very successful career. And I want to ask questions about that. So I'm going to ask questions based on the presence or absence of codes. I want to filter my cases to those cases where they have said, excuse me, where they've said they are making a high salary, and I want to grab the code, which I think is down here. Gotta find the right one. Oh, I was looking for fabulous. There we go. Fabulous non-traditional job. Okay. And so we'll select that one. And I'm going to try to find that as an indication of those individuals where, you know, I'm treating these two codes, and I might want to have a more complex criteria in a larger study, but I'm treating these two codes as evidence that the individual believes they're going to have a very successful career. So we're going to select those and see that only 2 of my 8 cases were filtered based upon presence of having both fabulous non-traditional job and the code I'm making a high salary, which surprises me, since when I was coding, it seemed like there should be more. So now I want to iterate as part of my analysis and understand, why am I only seeing, if I'm using these 2 codes as an indicator that they believe they're going to have the uber career 20 years in the future, why am I only seeing 2 out of my 8 people believe they have the uber career? You know, I could look at these, I could see what they're saying about the fabulous non-traditional job and making a high salary, but maybe for a moment I see it's only cases 2 and 5 that match these. But I remember on case 1, they were talking about having their own advertising agency. So let's go back to show all my cases and go back to case 1 and look at what we have here. So I see, well, here's the making a high salary, and here's works in a non-traditional field. So apparently I've used 2 different codes for having a high, a really great job. I've used the works in non-traditional field code, and I've also used the fabulous non-traditional job code. So let me try a different filter now by criteria, since I'm showing all my cases. And I'm going to build a slightly different criteria and see what comes up, where I'm going to say I want to go get making a high salary, and I want to get the codes works in a traditional field or fabulous non-traditional job. And I'm just going to put parentheses around that. So the criteria that I've now created is I want those cases that have the code making a high salary and either working in a non-traditional field or fabulous non-traditional job as my indicator of individuals with this high career job. And I can save the criteria. If I build a complex criteria and I want to apply it again and again, I can save it by just clicking save. We'll put this on my desktop where it's easy to locate. Excuse me, and hit save. And now I've saved that. I could load that criterion again, but I'm going to go ahead and select it. And now I see by the fact that I've essentially in my filtering criteria combined those 2 codes, that I have more than 50% of my subjects in my research study, 5 out of 8, believe they'll have this uber career. So I may want to do some code consolidation. I may want to combine those 2 codes. And I kind of like the works in non-traditional field rather than fabulous non-traditional job. So we're going to go back and show all my cases for a moment and go back here to case number 2, where I had one of those fabulous non-traditional job codes. And I could go to the codes menu now and rename this individual code or recode this individual code. And we'll do that. We'll recode that particular fabulous non-traditional job to works in a non-traditional field as part of my code consolidation. Click OK, and it says, we want to recode this specific one on case 2? Yep. Click OK. And now that's been changed to works in a non-traditional field. But what I really want to do is recode all of them. Everywhere that I used fabulous non-traditional job, I want to make it works in a non-traditional field. So I completely consolidate these two codes. And I can do that by doing it at the codebook level. So I could click on fabulous non-traditional job, and I could choose recode over here now and click on works in a traditional field and click select. And now it says, are you sure you want to do that everywhere? Yes. Now I've changed them everywhere. So now if I go back and I make sure my filters are showing all cases, and I do a filter by criteria, I can go back to the more simplest instruction of, making a high salary and works in a non-traditional field, and click select, and I get the same 5 out of 8 selected because I've consolidated my codes. So that's illustrative of how you can begin sort of slicing and dicing your data to ask questions. Who among my subjects are those with this high career drive? See where I may need to do code consolidation because I've used multiple codes by reviewing my data. Begin to perform code consolidation or refinement into higher level codes or higher level themes. To begin to narrow down on those people who have this high career drive. So now I've got just the 5 people, cases 1, 2, 5, 7, and 8. The only ones I don't have 3, 4, and 6 are not in here of my subjects. I might want to go select 3, 4, and 6 by filter cases by name. So I'm looking at the ones that don't appear to have the high career drive to review my coding to see if I missed something that's suggestive of why they have a high career drive. I could do that by doing exactly that, which is going over here and picking 3, 4, and 6, I believe, were the ones. Click OK. And I can start to look through here. Well, they have a works in a non-traditional field. The only one I didn't have is making a high salary. Maybe I didn't see any evidence of it. But then again, if I look here, they're seated in a wingback chair, overlooking in their pinstripe white Oxford, and they're head of one of Boston's largest law firms, which probably implies if they're head of one of the largest law firms that I should have coded this with making a high salary, but I didn't. So I may want to add that code in a review of coding. Now we'll look at the next one on the list, which is case number 4. In this case, the person in this class didn't know what their future would be, so that legitimately doesn't have any indications of this high career drive. I could move on and check the next one, etc. But if I then come back and show all cases again in this sort of iterative review of my stuff, and go back to my criteria and look at that criteria, which I should have saved this one, of making excuse me, making a high salary and works in a non-traditional field. Scroll down, works in a non-traditional field, and select this. Now see I'm up to 6 of 8 because I did some code refinement. So I can use this to begin reviewing my data, looking at where I need to revise coding, do code consolidation. Now for those people that have this high career drive, I want to see if they also think they're going to have the perfect family life. Can they achieve the Uber career, and do they imagine they'll have the Uber family life? So maybe now what I want to do is I want to, instead of looking at code frequencies, which I can run a frequency report at this point, and I can see in the frequency report, here's all my various codes. I can sort by total, which is a much more useful thing to see. A lot of people believe they can combine work and family without problems, get married, has children. So I see some family related codes up here. They're very high. Then my making a high salary, works in a non-traditional field, 50-50 marriage, successful, happy life, etc. So I'm seeing from the frequency count, and this frequency count is being shown just for the 6 people that are in my filter right now. So it's not all my people. Oh, sorry, it is all my people. Let me switch this to only filtered cases and codes. And now it's adjusted. So now it's just showing me these codes for the 6 people that I've got this filter for down here. You can change it to see only those filtered cases. And I see that among my 6 people with a high career, I'm seeing a high count of gets married and stays married, 50-50 marriage, has children. So it does look from a code frequency perspective like those with a high career drive also are interested in a high family life. But I've got a lot of other codes on here that may not be related. So what I may want to do is now provide a code reference filter. And in this case, I'm just going to filter my references for those family related codes like 50-50 marriage, gets married and stays married. If we scroll down here, successful, happy life, has children, um, some of these things that are very family oriented, and that's good enough for this example. So I pick a variety combining work and family. I pick a variety of codes that are family related. To filter my list of codes just to those that are family related. And similarly to cases, it's now showing me I only have 3 of 9 code references on this case. When I go to the next cases, I only have 2 of 11 on that case. The next one I have 6 of 15, right? I can always get back to see all my code references by say show all code references. But now that I've filtered to just the family references, I want to use my other tool, which is the report builder, to see the underlying content. And there's a lot of options in here which are covered in our documentation, but the key one here is I'm going to have it show me the name of the case, the code, the source file that was in, and the coded source material, that underlying content. And I'm going to sort it by code rather than case, and just display the report. I could export it as PDF, as text, as Word, as a variety of formats, but I'm just going to display the report here. And now I've got my combined work and family code, and I can see what people are saying for combined work and family across the 2 cases that it's there. The 50-50 marriage, which was one of the common ones, I can start to review what they're saying, what they actually said about having a 50-50 marriage across my various cases, and I can keep scrolling through the underlying content and review this, and I can start to see that yes, it does look like these people, when they're 20 years old, imagining what their life will be like in 20 years when they're 40 in the future, the majority of people in my study believe they're going to have the perfect career and the perfect family life. And so I can draw a conclusion that they have the majority of people have a very optimistic projection of their lives in the future. And these are our tools. I could then use this to review what they were saying. I could go back and do more code consolidation or apply different filters to ask different questions about my data. But this hopefully gave you a brief illustration to the simplicity of coding, and then analysis by using these filtering tools to start to slice and dice your data, and the frequency report and the report builder to review that data to iteratively sort of refine your coding until you have seen the themes and the evidence of what your research study is about emerge within your data. Are there any questions anyone has at this point? Well, if you, as usual, if you think of a question 5 minutes after the webinar is done, or 5 days after the webinar is done, I will point you over to our website where you can go there and go to contact technical support and ask any questions you have, whether you're a customer or you're just evaluating HyperRESEARCH, and the folks at technical support will be more than happy to take their best shot at answering whatever your questions may be. So if you have questions that you think of later, after this webinar is done, please feel free to ask them. Our support is 100% free. It doesn't matter whether you've purchased HyperRESEARCH or not. You can ask them any questions you want. You know, if you ask them something very specific about a methodological approach in a niche research area, we may have a little challenge trying to answer it, but they can certainly answer any questions about HyperRESEARCH, and they can often help you understand how to apply HyperRESEARCH in your particular field of research if you have questions like that. So they're pretty good. We get rated very highly on our support. Are there any other questions anyone has? What's the difference between the free trial and the licensed version of HyperRESEARCH? The answer is the license key. If you go to our downloads page and you download HyperRESEARCH here by scrolling down, the first is all about what the free trial is limited to, and then a little discussion of different license keys for different versions. But then you get down here and you download the appropriate version of HyperRESEARCH for you. And again, if you're a Mac OS user, it's the same version of HyperRESEARch, but it's two different DMG files, one for Catalina and one for everything other than Catalina. But you download the correct piece to run our installer to install HyperRESEARch. When HyperRESEARch installs, by default, it's running in free trial mode, and it will come up with a registration screen to ask you to enter a license key. If you skip the license key thing, it keeps running in the free trial mode, which has these limits up here to work within. If you put in a license key that you purchase and you get from us via an email, and you enter that license key, those limits are unlocked and you have no limits. You pretty much can code as much content as you want, and we have some research teams that are working with very large studies out there. So any other questions that anyone may have? Again, if you think of a question after the webinar ends, feel free to use our contact technical support to ask people what that question may be. So I want to thank everyone for attending our webinar today. We always appreciate the interest in HyperRESEARch. I hope this has been helpful to you in some way or other. Again, thank you for attending our webinar. That concludes our introduction to HyperRESEARch for qualitative analysis. Thank you, everyone. Oh, sorry, I saw a question just come in here just as I was wrapping up. Quick question. If we start with a free trial and decide to purchase later, does the data transfer? There's actually no transfer. If you start with a free trial and you start coding your data, when you run up against that limit, so let's say you get up to 7 cases and you want to create an 8th case, and it will when you try to do new case to create an 8th case, it's going to come up with a message and say, you can't do that. You can then purchase a license. You get emailed a license key. You go over to HyperRESEARch, and from the help menu, this will say register rather than show register information if it's the trial version. you pick a register and you enter that license key, and now those limits are unlocked. There's no transfer of information, there's no moving everything. You don't even have to reinstall the product if you're on the current version. You just put the license key in the registration key and the limits are unlocked. Sorry, I almost missed that question. Are there any other questions? I'm happy to stay here and answer questions for anyone that has any questions that you may have. Feel free to ask them, because again, as I said before, chances are if you have some question about the product, there's somebody else in our audience who has that question as well. All right, well, if there's no other questions, then I thank everyone for attending, and we'll just wrap this up.